All right, Talia. So you've got your book club meeting coming up to talk about all things Brown sisters.
Oh, fun.
And you want to be ready to dish about Act Your Age Eve Brown.
Right. Of course.
But you want to go in fresh.
Spoilers.
Smart. That's where we come in.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a deep dive into what we already know about Eve and Jacob. You know, based on the first 2 books in the series, Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and Take a Hint, Dani Brown. All without giving away any of the good stuff from Act Your Age Eve Brown.
We're like literary detectives here, Talia, looking for clues about their relationship, hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. Those little hints that suddenly mean everything when, you know, how it all ends up. So,
How about the foreshadowing?
Talia, you know, Eve Brown is a force of nature.
Oh, she is a whirlwind.
But I think it's worth thinking about why she's so impulsive, why she's constantly jumping from one thing to the next.
Right. It's not just about being chaotic for the sake of it.
Right.
Remember that scene where she falls into the pond trying to rescue a duck?
Oh my gosh.
Hilarious. But it also shows how much empathy. She just acts without overthinking.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
It's like she doesn't have that inner voice that tells most of us to maybe not jump into a murky pond with all our clothes on.
Precisely. And that impulsiveness, you see it in her career path too, right? She's tried everything. Wedding planning, dog grooming.
Yeah. She can't seem to settle.
But it's not just a lack of focus.
Yeah.
Look closer. She's drawn to these creative fields where she gets to work with people. There's this desire to make a real impact, even if her methods are, let's just say, a little unconventional.
Unconventional is a good word for Eve.
Right.
So we're seeing a pattern here.
Definitely.
Eve acts from the heart.
Yes.
And that can lead to amazing things or total disasters.
That's Eve for you.
But Talia, I think that's what makes her so relatable. We've all had those moments where we just followed our gut.
Oh, absolutely. For better or worse.
And now let's talk about Jacob Wayne, our potential Mr. Right, who seems to live and breathe by routines and spreadsheets.
Complete opposite of Eve.
Oh yeah, talk about a 180. This is a guy who color codes his spices. Talia, what do you think's behind that need for order?
Good question. Could be a coping mechanism, be a personality quirk, or something even deeper. You know, he's really uncomfortable in social situations, much prefers his spreadsheet.
Yeah, he's definitely more comfortable with data than with like small talk.
Right. And that could point to something more than just liking organized. You know, Talia, the term neurodiversity might be something to think about
Interesting.
It covers a range of neurological, like which can sometimes look like needing predictable routines and having trouble with social cues.
Wow. So are we saying Jacob might be autistic?
We can't say for sure based on what we've seen in the books. It's not our place to diagnose characters.
Right, of course.
But thinking about this possibility, it helps us understand his behavior better and maybe see the challenges he might face in a relationship with someone like Eve.
Yeah, think about it.
Eve thrives on spontaneity, while Jacob needs structure. How would they handle those fundamental differences?
That's where that whole opposites attract idea comes in, right?
Exactly.
But it's not just about cute differences.
No.
It's about how those differences create conflict and push them both to grow.
You hit the nail on the head.
And remember in Take a Hint, when Jacob helps Dani, even though he says he doesn't like her.
Yes. So interesting.
That shows a protective side and a real kindness. It contradicts that whole standoffish vibe he gives off at first.
Right. He cares deeply, even if he doesn't always show it in the typical ways.
Okay, so we've got Eve, the free spirit who wears her heart on her sleeve.
Yes.
And Jacob, our structured, possibly neurodivergent soul.
Two very different people.
Now picture them together in the charming chaos of Jacob's B&B.
Oh, good.
It's a recipe for, well, we'll get to that.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
But before we jump ahead, let's look for clues in those first 2 books. Little moments that hint at these 2 completely different people actually falling for each other.
I like it. Let's play detective.
Okay, so there's that scene where Eve calls Jacob sweet.
Oh, yes.
And he gets so flustered.
I remember that, Talia. It might seem insignificant, but it shows a crack in that controlled exterior. A little vulnerability.
And Eve, she just has a way of bringing that out in people.
Doesn't she?
All right, so we've got Eve's warmth, maybe melting Jacob's icy exterior, and his hidden kindness poking through. But how does this all play out in their relationship? What challenges will they face? And most importantly, Talia, will they get there happily ever after? We're going to dive deeper into that right after this. All right, Talia. So we've talked about all those differences between Eve and Jacob and how those differences could bring them together or push them apart. But how would they even connect on a deeper level? You know, how would they even get there?
Well, one way to think about that is through their communication styles.
Oh, interesting.
Remember how Eve is super direct, almost brutally honest at times?
Oh, yeah. She just says whatever pops into her head.
Exactly. And Jacob, on the other hand, he's so reserved, you know? Almost cryptic sometimes. He might have trouble expressing how he feels, especially if he is neurodivergent.
That's a really good point. So their communication styles are like total opposites.
Yeah, basically from different planets.
That could lead to a lot of misunderstandings, couldn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Imagine Eve trying to have a heart-to-heart, and Jacob just shuts down or hides behind his spreadsheets.
Oof, that would be rough.
Total recipe for romantic comedy, though.
Like, for sure.
Lots of miscues and mixed signals, but It's also a chance for them to learn from each other.
Okay, I like that.
Eve might learn to be more patient, more understanding, realizing that Jacob's silence doesn't always mean he doesn't care.
And Jacob.
He might be pushed to step outside his comfort zone and learn to open up more and freak more, express his emotions.
So their weaknesses could actually become strengths when they're together.
Right. They could help each other become better communicators.
Yeah. I can totally see that happening. Like them trying to figure each other out, fumbling through conversations, but eventually finding a way to connect.
And Talia, don't forget about the humor in all of this.
Oh, there's definitely going to be some laughs.
Think about those hilarious moments in the first 2 books, you know, with Eve's chaotic energy crashing into Jacob's structured world.
Like a bull in a china shop.
It's comedy gold. I can picture her messing up one of his perfectly planned B&B events.
Oh my gosh, or him trying to teach her to fold towels the right way.
Exactly. But no, it's not all going to be laughs and hijinks, Talia.
True.
Remember how those earlier books tackled some pretty serious stuff like chronic pain and past trauma?
Yeah.
I think Act Your Age, Eve Brown, is going to delve into those deeper emotional issues.
And those could be what brings them closer together.
Right. Imagine Eve with her big heart creating this safe space for Jacob to be vulnerable.
And Jacob with his quiet strength offering Eve the stability she might secretly be longing for.
I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
It's like those differences. The things that could tear them apart could also be the foundation for a deep and meaningful connection.
That's the beauty of it, right? It challenges this whole idea that we need to be with someone just like us to be happy.
Maybe true love is about embracing those differences, learning from them, growing together.
Exactly. But we can't forget about the outside forces at play here.
Oh, yeah.
The Brown family. Remember how much they meddled in Chloe and Dani's relationship?
They were always getting involved.
I have a feeling Eve and Jacob will face the same thing.
Oh, totally. Can you imagine Eve trying to explain Jacob to her family?
I can't even imagine Jacob at a Brown family gathering with all the noise and chaos.
That would be hilarious.
Yeah.
And probably a little heartwarming, too, seeing them accept him for who he is.
And don't forget about Jacob's Aunt Lucy.
Oh, yeah. She's fierce.
Very protective of Jacob. I bet she's skeptical of Eve's free-spirited.
Just like Red's grandma was with Chloe.
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see how Lucy reacts.
Okay. So we've got family to contend with. But what about the public eye? Remember how Dani and Zaf's relationship was all over the news?
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Could Eve and Jacob face that kind of scrutiny too?
Possibly, especially with Eve's tendency to draw attention and Jacob's desire for privacy.
Imagine the media frenzy if their relationship goes public.
It could force them to face some tough stuff, their insecurities, their need for control, and ultimately learn to trust each other in the midst of the chaos.
Wow. So we've got communication challenges, vulnerability, family drama, maybe even public scrutiny, and of course, a whole lot of laughs along the way.
It sounds like Act Your Age, Eve Brown, is going to be a wild ride.
Talia, you're in for a treat.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore.
Exactly. And speaking of exploring, there's one more thing about Eve and Jacob that I find fascinating. We've spent a lot of time talking about Eve and Jacob's differences and how those differences could lead to, conflict, but also really beautiful connection. But I want to zero in on one specific difference that we keep coming back to: Jacob's potential neurodiversity.
Yeah, it's such an interesting layer to their story.
It's not just about labeling a character.
Right.
Right. It's about understanding how someone's neurology can shape their whole experience.
Exactly. And it's especially interesting in a romance novel, because romance is all about those unspoken cues, those grand gestures, the emotional vulnerability, which can be really hard for someone on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. Think about it. Eve thrives on physical touch, spontaneity, expressing her emotions openly.
Right.
And Jacob might be uncomfortable with being touched unexpectedly. He might crave predictability. And he might struggle to put his feelings into words.
Yeah.
Their love languages could be totally different.
Yeah. So how do they bridge that gap? It feels like it could go south really fast. Eve feeling rejected and Jacob feeling overwhelmed.
It's definitely a potential challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity for growth. Remember, Talia, how Chloe helped Red understand her chronic pain, even though it was invisible to everyone else?
Oh, yeah.
Eve could do the same for Jacob with her empathy and willingness to learn. She could help him figure out his own needs and communicate them. It's like she could become his advocate in a world that doesn't always get neurodiversity.
Exactly. And Jacob, in turn, could teach Eve about patience and consistency, showing her that love doesn't have to be this big flatting.
Right. It can be quiet and steady and expressed through actions.
Exactly.
But let's be real for a second, Talia. Wouldn't it be kind of a cop-out if their love story just magically fixed Jacob's neurodiversity?
It would be. And it's so important to avoid that trope, love conquers all, especially when we're talking something as complex as neurodiversity. Jacob's autism, if that's what he has as part of him, it's not something that needs to be cured by love.
It's about acceptance, not trying to change someone.
Exactly. And that's where Eve really shines. She embraces people for who they are, quirks and all.
She doesn't try to fit people into a box.
Great. It's that unconditional acceptance that could be the foundation of their connection. Jacob might finally feel seen and understood, not in spite of his differences, but because of them.
Okay, so we've got potential for growth acceptance, a love story that challenges the norm. But what about the ending? Do you think they'll get there happily ever after?
Ooh, that's the big question. I don't want to spoil anything because, honestly, that's part of the fun of reading a romance novel, right?
Yeah, the anticipation is half the fun.
Exactly. But I do think it's safe to say that Act Your Age, Eve Brown, is going to push some boundaries, challenge some stereotypes, and explore human connection in a way that's both heartwarming and make.
Absolutely. And Talia, as you dive into this book, really pay attention to those little moments, the details that show how deeply they connect. Look for how they challenge each other, support each other, and ultimately learn to love each other for exactly who they are.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And remember, Talia, this deep dive is just the beginning. It's giving you some insights, maybe sparked some new questions. Now it's your turn to experience the magic of Eve and Jacob's story. Let us know how your book club goes. We're dying to hear what you think.